Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. Welcome to the first webinar in the four-part Foundations for Change series hosted by the AgriDENZ Alliance for the Climate with support from New Zealand's Ministry for Primary Industries and Germany's Federal Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Regional Identity. Today's session will explore the growing commercial, policy, and regulatory drivers shaping agriculture, greenhouse gas emissions research and development globally. We will look at how evolving market expectations and sustainability standards are influencing agriculture production systems, particularly in the global south. We will also discuss how countries, industries, and producers worldwide can respond to these challenges whilst maintaining productivity and trade competitiveness. My name is Akim Mwape from the Agrifusion Center in New Zealand. I am also the AgriDENZ Third Country Party lead for Africa. I will serve as your chair for today's session. Before we begin, I would like to share just a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing on the AgriDENZ website. Today's program will include one keynote presentation followed by a Q&A session that is going to lead us towards the end of the hour. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat throughout the session, and we will answer as many as time allows. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your participation and look forward to a productive and engaging webinar. I would like to begin by introducing my colleagues, Dr. Nina Grasnick and Dr. Anoma Gunarathan, who will provide some background on the AgriDENZ Alliance and on the broader context of today's session. Nina serves as project coordinator for the AgriDENZ Alliance, whilst Anoma is the German third-party country lead for the Alliance. Nina, over to you.
Thank you, Akim, and also a warm welcome from my side as AgriDENZ project coordinator to everyone who joins us today for the first webinar in the Foundations for Change series. I'm very excited also to hear more from Frans later on, but just a few words on the AgriDENZ project beforehand. AgriDENZ is an alliance for the climate. It's a dialogue on climate and agriculture between New Zealand and Germany, and it started in 2024 and is a bilateral cooperation project funded by Germany's Federal Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Regional Identity, as well as the New Zealand's Ministry for Primary Industries. And the aim of this initiative is to strengthen collaboration and mutual learning in response to growing challenges climate change presents to agriculture and food systems globally. And the key focus of this initiative is to also strengthen engagement with third-party countries, particularly in the global south, through scientific exchange, policy dialogue, capacity building, and also multi-stakeholder dialogues. So this webinar series perfectly fits into that key focus, and we hope to support and to intensify the exchange between German, New Zealand, and partner country research institutions, but also other stakeholders in the Global South to establish a dialogue on priority topic and policy issues related to climate change mitigation in agriculture. So I'm very much looking forward to the talk later on. But beforehand, I hand over to Anoma, who will provide some more background on the webinar series.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rina. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for participating in the first webinar. So I will give a brief introduction to this webinar series. The Foundation for Change webinar series was developed as a part of AgriDENZ ongoing commitment to support countries in the Global South in strengthening agricultural productivity, food security, market competitiveness, and agricultural greenhouse gas accounting. Bringing together participants from across Africa, Asia, and beyond, this webinar series aims to create a meaningful platform for knowledge sharing, technical exchange, and also for collaboration on the key drivers, tools, and investment opportunities shaping low-emission agriculture. Across these three webinar series, leading international experts will share their practical experiences, emerging research, and also the lessons learned from different regions around the world. I will point out some topics. The first one is the market and policy drivers influencing agricultural change. And the second one is practical tools for measuring and managing agricultural emissions. And the third one will focus on the evolving global investment landscape supporting climate smart and low emission agricultural development. If you want to stay updated on the next webinars and also our AgriDENZ activities, feel free to sign up to our newsletters. You can see the link in the chat. And also importantly, this webinar series is designed not only to share the information, but also to strengthen the partnerships and encourage collaboration between researchers, policymakers, industry representatives, and also develop partners. And we hope this discussion will help participants better understanding how to respond to change in sustainability expectations while maintaining productivity and competitiveness, and also identifying opportunities for future cooperation, innovation, and climate finance. We are very pleased to have you with us today and looking forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anoma, and thank you also, Nina, for providing that valuable overview of the AgriDENZ Alliance and the broader context for today's webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today's session, Dr. Frans van Wyk. Frans is a director at Agrifusion in South Africa and is a sustainability expert with more than 30 years of experience in project management, advisory services across the agriculture sector. His work spans the broader agriculture value chain and includes strategic planning and facilitation, environmental, social, and governance advisory services, and socio-economic research and development. Frans brings extensive experience working with stakeholders across the agriculture industry on issues related to sustainability, competitiveness, and sector transformation. Frans holds a BSc with honors in agriculture economics from Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and is also a chartered accountant. Frans, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, insights on how the drivers are shaping change within the agricultural systems. Over to you, Frans.
Thank you so much, Akim, and thank you for the invitation. So everybody out there, if you hear a dog bark or maybe a bird singing, I'm actually on a farm, so I'm not going to apologize for that, but I promised you to be authentic. So bear with me. Thank you for your time. I'm going to share my presentation quickly just to have it on screen, and then we can take it from there. I hope you all can see it. So thank you for the opportunity. It was covered in the introduction, and thank you for the kind words, Hakeem. I'm not a PhD, but thank you for that honor. I'll take it. My background of all is that I'm a livestock farmer. I know a little bit about the biology, and I know a little bit about the soil, and the fact that we've been brought up to be good custodians. And with that background, and obviously lots of client interventions, wisdom and guidance from their side, this is the context I'm trying to paint today, or picture. I think the second important point is I represent the private sector. And when you hear viable financial positions, when you hear sustainable ventures, understand that there is an economic context to that as well. So I don't know all the answers, but what I do know is that there are a couple of tension lines, or ironies as we call it, in the fact that, and I think I'm going to start off with that, the global north, global south tension line is picking up by the day, and I think we'll cover that throughout the presentation. So friends in the north, global north, please bear with me. I think the second tension line is we often find that a lot of research is being done, unfortunately not necessarily always focusing on the right outcomes. And a short story around that would be, we need to ensure that we are clear in terms of what we want to achieve. Is it in the best interest of the end user, irrespective of word here? So I think that's just the context. And why I'm telling you this is I think it's a layered ecosystem, layered in terms of different lenses, layered in terms of different outcomes. So let's just be honest on the complexity thereof. And again, depending on where you are positioned in these value chains, or on the policy side in public sector, there might be a different view. But I think that's part of the discussion, and part of this webinar series is exactly, Nina, to cover different lenses, different aspects, and I think different needs. So if there are any concerns or questions, we'll cover that under the Q&A session. I'm going to jump in with a couple of numbers, and might not be perfectly right, but I think we are not talking about a future risk anymore when we touch on the climate theme. I think the livestock industry has got a specific target on its back in terms of global methane. Numbers like 42% emissions are mentioned. 68 plus countries have positioned themselves around carbon pricing. And we know the 2026 date in terms of the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism rules. And the exporting countries like South Africa, specifically around wine, is already paying, call it the import duty, but definitely linked to achieving a cleaner end product for the consumers. The shift we do see is not a compliance barrier anymore. We see this now converting into a not only market demand, but also around financing opportunities. It has come a long way, but we're really excited about the latest developments, especially driven by the European funders. We see this all happening in other facets of the private sector. So the three elements I really want to touch on today is, what do we see happening on the regulatory side? What's the feedback from the market? And obviously, how do we respond, or how do we fund this transition, meaning capital markets? Again, three lenses. And if we use the Africa and Asia context, again, limiting the needs down here and including Asia, I think we might touch on some nerves. So apologies for that up front. But I think the importance of the debate is, in fact, to put forward risks and opportunities, and not only get stuck in terms of what doesn't work. So in terms of regulatory wave, we've seen a bit of a timeline coming since 2023. European Union being leading the debate. We saw the deforestation enforcement coming through, hugely problematic for Global South. We, in fact, have still got good forests and keep on planting. 2025, the sustainability disclosure requirements started making headwinds, especially on the listed side, meaning scope 3. This year, the CBAM comes into full implementation. However, in South Africa specifically, only by 2028, we will know if agriculture is to be included or not. So it's been currently excluded, but it doesn't leave you without any excuses anymore. So the strategy right now is to use the time productively, get strategies approved and starting with implementation so that when 2028 comes, we at least are fit to run that race. And then from 27 onwards, we do expect global methane pledges coming through. And as I said, especially around the livestock industry globally, a huge target in terms of methane emissions. Critical in our context, as I said in my introduction, is that we need to have a Global South version of rules and regulations in place. If not, it's going to be problematic. And we talk specifically around emission factors. We talk specifically around research to be done, obviously to substantiate whatever we use as a model going forward. Export markets, especially in terms of the end user, has raised their voice. Some instances we do not really trust the numbers as communicated, but I think in terms of verified baseline studies, more and more information comes forward. I did touch on the scope 3 emission requirements, highly problematic, huge costs to obtain those net numbers. But again, I think it's inevitable where we talk about an integrated value chain. The measurement, reporting and validation frameworks, from full traceability, we talk from farm to fork. That has been embedded in different levels of the value chain. We work quite closely with the geographical indications, beverage, export products, all being fully traced at the moment. And again, a good footprint if you really want to get to the point of origin. Again, from an investment side, the markets have really opened up interesting opportunities, not necessarily scalable. And I think that to me is especially from a producer side, one of the key questions. And then we obviously see more and more alignment with the SBTI, all the other global frameworks, and even in our own country, our stock exchanges come forward with very helpful guidelines to assist companies in developing specific roadmaps to become more compliant. Corporate companies, Woolworths, Tesco, Walmart, all the different versions of the same questionnaire, but I think the essence is that where it was a nice to have 3 years ago with wonderful pictures, it's now becoming embedded in terms of annual audits. And you can call it quality audits if you want, but we see that growing every 6 months in terms of more and more questions coming through. The question around climate risk and how is that priced in terms of the capital products we see out there. Again, I think European driven to some extent. The local credit decisions are more and more being built around what is the non-financial measurement and what has been done over and above the norm. So we do see the ESG-linked lending competitive rates at the moment, however, not necessarily all practical. As I've indicated, the scale many of these investors are looking at is not doable in our side of the world. Scope 3 is on the rise. I think the climate risk credit decisions is not only limited to our financial institutions anymore, it's also coming through in terms of our short-term insurers. And again, the whole methane debate has been put forward as a huge systemic risk. Fortunately, we do see good research happening at the moment around feedstock, around certain types of animals being selected, genetics is coming through. And then we also see some good work being done on the biogenic carbon side, especially on the fiber. So those are work in progress, but all, I think, limiting future risk to some extent, obviously, if properly verified. Otherwise, we might end up with a totally skew outcome, totally opposite what was expected. So why Asia, why Africa? I think probably from a developing side, most exposed, vulnerable in terms of extensive grazing areas. Our country, about 72% of our total area is extensive grazing. We don't have any national frameworks within which we can really report, monitor, or mitigate systemic overstatement of emissions. We have a high pressure levels, at least from our importers on the other side. And again, every year, the incidence of floods, droughts, extreme weather conditions is just being pushed down our throats. Where I sit 14 days ago, this was a total lake of water and devastation from outside of nowhere. We early in the autumn, and this is not supposed to happen. However, we might be vulnerable, but I think the opportunity are as big, and I think that's the question today is as first movers, with a proper monitoring system, with proper emission calculations supported by science, we do have a huge opportunity in terms of attracting global climate funding. I think the impact of such funding is exponential. And to me, one of the outcomes of today's discussion would be the question, how do we optimize on the one side, the opportunities, and on the other side, available funding to cover the just transition? Key question I often get from clients is what happens if we don't act? I think the question of what is the opportunity cost or cost of delay, where we sit, where we engage with a lot of players in these value chains, it is no more a question of should I, it's more a question of where can I start? And it's, as I indicated earlier, probably different lenses depending on where you are in the value chain. And the main reason is we only use a risk-based approach. If there is a high risk in terms of climate exposure, you need to react, you need to fund, and you need to build. If there is a low risk, we urge our clients not to do anything because we think we're barking up the wrong tree. So at the moment, I think one of the key missing points in the way forward is something simple like a proper baseline study. It might sound a little bit ridiculous in terms of, I guess, global north, but down here, we have seen some efforts in this direction, but probably not sufficient to provide a real good basis going forward. In terms of market access, I've quickly touched on it, but definitely on the left-hand side, CBAM, being a leading driver at the moment. We do expect huge growth in terms of livestock exports within Southern Africa. However, if we do not solve the question around our emission factors, around the full traceability, and around mitigating steps, we might miss the opportunity. The middle block, the yellow one around the procurement side, we as I indicated, bi-weekly, we get new questions coming in, people wanting us to provide more and more information. And again, on the right-hand side, you need to have fully supported science-backed research to provide baselines, to provide progress, and to demonstrate that the investments, effort, and energy that went into this is at least moving the needle. Question again, if Africa and Asia is not moving, somebody else will move, and obviously those markets will get saturated. So from a private sector point of view, probably the biggest driver, we want our product to be sold. And it's not a question, what else do you want? It's the question, what else can we do to make sure that we end up on the right shelves? I did touch on the capital penalty. It's a bit of a thumb suck on the left-hand side, but I think this is probably a good indication of where we can position funding. The right-hand high emission 4.8% is high, but the message is clear. And I did indicate not only your DFI or normal commercial funding, but also your insurance side is tightening. We see soil health as becoming a big ticket down here in Southern Africa. A lot of work currently being done. However, we're still in children's shoes at the moment, given that not enough research have been done in terms of that. And on the backside of that, even something like our carbon credit markets are moving relatively slow. But we hope that by the end of this year, we'll have our local standards proved, which will bring down costs of verification. And again, that might ease up constraints around registering valid projects. The data question is of key importance. If you don't measure, you don't know. It seems to be that on the relatively smaller players in the value chain, this is probably one of the biggest challenges. It comes at a cost. It needs to be verified and obviously needs to be aligned with our reporting standards. So at the moment, we see a lot of scope 1 emissions being covered. We think it's, as I said, just the starting point. But within that context, we do see leading private sector players, at least. We do see our local governments and provincial and national governments coming to the table in terms of assisting. And as I earlier indicated, even our local stock exchange has played a good pivotal role in terms of just quantifying and putting forward measurement frameworks. So a lot of new technology that we hope that come by can assist us. Satellite monitoring, drone monitoring, soil probes. These are in the making at the moment, but I see probably for the next 24 months a good period of collecting more and more data, obviously up for verification, and then we can take it from there. So the question is, what now? And in terms of the way forward, I think the important point is in the middle of the page there. Science, the tools, the architects of finance, partnerships, they are all there. The question is political will and industry leadership. And unfortunately, again, I don't think it's a Global South problem alone. If we do not have those two important levers, this will stay a long stretch debate with no clear outcomes. So I think that is my second pledge today, is that we need political buy-in to make this work. Industry leadership, we're assisting a lot of the industry bodies at the moment just to identify key climate risks, just to identify mitigating steps, to lobby that back towards their members, and we see good traction on that. However, I'm not so sure that the political will is enough to pull this through. So the 5 pillars we really want to move towards, and that's getting to the end of the presentation, would be around a national measurement, reporting, and validation framework. It would be around blended finance. It would be around regional platforms, including the supply chain, and as I've indicated, policy alignment around it. So bear with me. So this is basically then let's call it the 5 policy levers. within which each of these countries now need to, bog down to the details, make sure we have proper baselines. I think that will be a good starting point. I think a second driver in terms of just transition finance would be to engage with the different credit committees, making sure that they understand the context, making sure that they understand why. I think the third lever is around locally calibrated emission factors. Without that, we lost in the middle of the desert. Number 4, around the whole supply chain traceability and transparency. Yes, we have local standards. However, it's not compulsory at the moment, and that is a big driver. And then number 5 would be around your science policy platforms, making sure that we do share information, making sure that we make available good research that can assist. What is in there for the early movers? And yes, we do see some positives within New Zealand, Australia, and Brazil. A lot of work being done. I think in terms of New Zealand, the lessons learned is around pricing incentives. I did touch on the carbon credit side as well. Australia, again, industry-led measurements, making sure that the public-private model is been assisted. And in terms of Brazil, making sure that we have, from a government side, finance architecture that can scale at a speed. So practical examples. If these 3 countries could do it, there's no reason why any other country in Africa or Asia cannot embark on this journey. Right, so in terms of finance, we see a lot of products being go around in terms of global climate funds. Huge numbers, unfortunately not always accessible, especially by the smaller projects. Development finance is coming to the table. We work quite closely with the IFC and African Development Bank, but there might be other structures similar that one can link into. And then obviously on the ESG-linked loans, again, prove your mitigating steps, get it measured. And we are quite surprised about the de-risking factor that does bring. So I think that the bottom block is just how do we make this work in terms of a bankable project? Get a baseline, get your monitoring system, get your policy signals from your government, and obviously make sure that you have an offtake agreement with clear market linkages. The partnerships we believe in is good, and we need to co-design our systems around it. We need to map the research, make sure that we end up with scalable, bankable projects, which we believe there are. And again, making sure that whatever platform we use, it's been aligned to future ESG reporting frameworks. We believe that's the only language, global language, people understand around the SDGs. So it's important that we build and design around that. So the call to action, I'm kind of closing off, is making sure that, because this is an expensive and a tedious exercise, we need to align government, industry, and finance, each in their own sphere of expertise. And I really want to be bold and put forward a vision that by 2035, every kilogram of protein from Africa and Asia carries a credible climate credential. The emphasis on credible. We're not depicting here what the number should be, but I think that's down to the local constitutions, making sure that we are relevant in these specific countries. So the commitments, again, putting my neck on a block. Commitment 1 would be around establishing all the baselines, making sure that it's done properly per country and per value chain. Make sure that we include our smallholders, especially in Africa and in Asia. That is around about 80% of all agricultural production comes from smallholder farmers. With that comes training, with that comes information sharing. Commitment 2 is from industry side. Again, if we have this traceable value chain, if we have proper baselines, it's a matter of how do we invest, how do we ensure that the supply within Scope 1 and Scope 2 is done responsibly. I think there is wonderful cohesion and wonderful commercial benefits within these industry-linked initiatives in the value chain. And then on the right-hand side would be around the financiers, making sure that the promises and wonderful products around climate funding does become reality and not only stay on the PRO desk. So bankable, yes, but if we have a bankable initiative, don't push us from starboard to port and back, and nobody seems to be interested. So I think there's a key action going forward. Right, so just to close off, I hope you learned something about your own country's way forward in terms of possible gaps, especially around the measurement, reporting, and validation. Making sure that we understand the importance of baselines and making sure that we understand the importance of having verified data available that can be communicated. I think the 90-day commitment or challenge would be around making sure that the local authorities in your own country support these baseline studies, making sure that there's funding. And then again, our national determined contribution from the Paris Agreement, that is a fixed number. It now needs to start working. And then I think the challenge for the September webinar, if my dates are correct, Akim, is each of us to come up with a bankable project that we can really push and test the system. Again, we can stay on an academic level. We can employ lots of scientists to do studies, but it needs to be tested. So on the right-hand side is just a little bit of a circular model we trying to follow in South Africa, meaning that if you start at your, let's say, 4 o'clock on the watch, food and ecological stability, which we believe is already done by 80% of our players in these value chains. They just don't know they do it. They don't have words why they do it, but they've been for centuries busy with a level, not necessarily all science-backed, not necessarily backed by the right data yet. But I think we have enough evidence that the movement is out there. We need to understand how do we document and how do we communicate that to get it to a science-based action. But only then we'll be able to access funding and obviously secure and maintain existing and new markets. So I'm closing off, Akim, with a key point, and that is we need to manage risk. I'm an auditor. If we miss the risk, we miss the opportunity. So my closing notes would be manage your risks properly and you will be able to enable growth. Thank you. I'm handing over back to you, Akim.
Thank you, Frans, even for just ending with that. I remember in the last meeting that I attended, I think somebody closed off with a very insightful question on risk, saying that our conversation now is no longer about targets, but it is now a conversation about risk. And you've just ended in a similar fashion. We have a number of questions that we have to get through. And maybe let me just begin with a colleague from Malawi who is saying the presentation is very informative, but countries like Malawi will even be hit harder by the procurement standards that are being implemented in the global north. And they are saying for countries like Malawi who are still using tier 1 tier 1 inventories, it's even very difficult. So the question is, how can a country like Malawi get some climate finance to develop a feed basket inventory and do laboratory tests, and also to help demarcate grazing areas which are decreasing due to the promotion of irrigation and the population increase? Your thoughts, Frans?
Thank you, Akim. Thank you for the question. I think it's a good and relevant question. We need to break this question down into more workable chunks, if I can call it like that. In Africa, we have a saying, how do you eat an elephant? Chunk by chunk. You just start somewhere, right? So again, relevant to Malawi, I think your industry body, meaning that if you are producing cassava, if you are in the fishing industry, I think the industry body should play a leading role. What we find in South Africa is that if we have an industry lens, we can identify our risks much better. And I'm coming back, Akim, to the risk-based approach, that if that is your starting point relevant to your section of the value chain, I think that becomes easier to convince your financier that I'm actually doing the right thing. And I'm not copying a JSE or a FTSE report I've read of some global listed company. So that'll be my starting point. And I think from there, the key point would be back to the political will, is to properly lobby your outcomes you want by a certain date. And we often find that industry bodies come up with wonderful solutions, but if it's not embedded in policy, it's of no use. And that comes back to the 3 circles we touched on: industry, financiers, and then your regulatory sphere, meaning your local and provincial and national government. So my thinking would be around cover these 3 bases with risk-based research and build your bankable case from that point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Claudia. Where do you see the biggest challenges for Africa in terms of the CBAM or the EUDR?
So I'm talking from a local perspective in South Africa. The biggest challenge we have is that 80% of our negative footprint, of our carbon footprint, is due to our national energy supplier called Eskom. Unfortunately, Eskom only use majority, not only, but the majority of energy is still coal-based. And as long as that is embedded in our national energy suppliers grid system, you can't do, you're kind of stuck in that sense. So my suggestion would be that one need to look at this from different angles. I think energy probably a key driver. And the main reason is it ends up in scope 2. It ends up in scope 3 emissions because of that influence of energy throughout. I mean, if we talk about livestock, especially on the feed side, it's tainted. So solar investments is part of that solution, I think. The second point would be around transport. Again, reliability of your national railway infrastructure is of key. So I think the answer is not a kind of single silver wand somebody waves. And again, I think that's where your research and a joint effort by our scientists needs to be put forward and communicated. Akim, and I think the session we jointly attended earlier this year in Pretoria was exactly the question: how do we learn from one another? And how do we obviously kind of prevent that we end up in different silos, everybody doing their own thing, but there's no cross-pollination? And I think that's the key message I really want to get across, is that we need to talk more of who is busy with what and then we use that as a proper starting point.
Thank you, Frans. Just related to that, you did emphasize the importance of having proper baselines, and there are a number of questions about that. The first one is on who do you see to be in charge to establish such a baseline, or which elements of this baseline should we focus on?
So we see two different, let's say, two different sets of audiences around this. The one audience would be your export-orientated commodities. They are already been pushed by the importers to come up with a verified set of information. And obviously, to get to that verified progress report, you need to have a baseline as a starting point. So that has been done. I mean, they haven't been asked for, they just did it because they realized to, again, access markets, maintain and grow new markets, they will inevitably miss out if that's not done. So that's your export kind of crowd. The non-export crowd is probably more difficult because it's now becoming a self-regulatory environment. I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing to do, not necessarily because the market asks me. So we do see a bit of a slower uptake on the non-exporters, especially around grain, wheat, livestock to some extent. So we need to probably be a little bit more patient. Again, we work with private sector. Private sector only spends money if they are in dire straits. They don't waste money, not at all. And I think this is a wise approach to say, well, let's see how things develop. And we need to be patient. I think pushing somebody into a specific avenue down here will just create tension and people will just walk away. So I'm again, it needs to be private sector driven. National governments, I don't believe, has got much interest in establishing these baselines. They've got a national determined contribution from the Paris Agreement, and that's as far as they'll push it. They'll put it in regulatory and policy papers, but probably limited access and limited influence on what happens at grassroots level.
Yeah, for some time now, Frans, we have been talking about the need for GHG inventories, especially within the agriculture sector. And Veronica here wants to know how important is the development of high quality and more extensive activity data for improving GHG inventories and mitigation strategies. And do you think African governments have opportunities to work on this in the coming years? Just your insights and perspectives on that.
Thank you, Akim. I've been waiting for this question. No, in practical terms, the national determined, the emission factors, European or US based, is really not applicable to our extensive conditions. We know what the winters look up there, or in global north, we know that how many animals needs to be shielded or protected in these harsh conditions. And obviously that's a different outcome to your extensive free-range farming practices. So again, the applicability of these emission factors, it'll be a sin just to copy and paste because we say there is nothing else available. And that's my call back to the research ecosystem, is to really assist country-specific solutions for these emission factors. I've indicated to you that our energy supplier, unfortunately, is a big part of our challenge down here. But private sectors jumped to the opportunity in terms of solar, as I said. But a really good baseline can only be established if your emission factors have been sorted. So where we sit is that it's a key requirement at the moment across the whole value chain, including all commodities, is to ensure that a local emission factor is researched properly, it gets published, obviously challenged, But if that's not done relatively early in the process, there's no way that we can defend any progress. There's no way that we can really defend what we want to see, and that is a de-risked enterprise, because they've invested also on the non-financial side. And to me, that is, again, coming back to our risk discussion. If we're not successful in that, we will lose the total battle, and we'll lose credibility. And that is the concern we have, is that promises without properly funded baselines and properly researched numbers will be wasting somebody's time, and the reputation risk, we believe, is just too immense.
Thank you. And I think just adding to your thoughts, Dr. Natu Saka from Bangladesh has just emphasized here in the comments on the need for international cooperation and collaboration. Dr. Natu, we I think passionate about partnerships and collaboration, so let's get in touch. There is another comment here from Ms. Muhoni from Malawi also, saying it's a good idea as a regional bloc like SADC to develop one bankable project in livestock industry to help track GHG emissions and how to reduce them to be in line with what was declared in the NDCs. So is it possible to have such a regional approach, Frans?
In Akim, maybe in theory, yes, I think it's a good point. The question, however, is if we have aligned risks, definitely. If we don't have aligned risks, I'm concerned that we might end up with a vanilla solution, meaning that, you know, in paper it looks okay, but we're not addressing the real issues. So that'll be my only kind of condition to a SADC solution, is that on condition of similar risks, yes. My thinking would probably be to narrow it down to specific value chains. And I think there might be value in understanding a SADC value chain on grain, or understanding a SADC value chain on livestock farming. So probably better traction on that level. But as long as we have aligned risks, I'm open for good discussions on that side, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Frans. And Ms. Mohoni, I think this is a good time to just state that the question that you have raised will be quite pertinent, especially for the Agri-GHG Africa-wide symposium that the Quinisa initiative is convening. I think that information will be made available even through this platform. I think that's where regional initiatives like this would be discussed. So please get in touch with the Quinisa initiative for more information on that. Last two questions. I can see that time is against us. There is a question on environmental, social, and governance models and MRV systems. The question is, there's a growing number of these frameworks, and some of it creating clarity and some creating confusion. So how can Africa avoid this fragmentation across competing MRV systems?
Thank you, Akim. Probably the most difficult question of the morning or the evening. I think the convergence we do see in terms of the global frameworks is positive, meaning that 20 years ago it was GRI on the one side, and on the other side we probably, with ISSB also coming onto the table, we're now seeing, I think, better alignment and probably less confusion. That's the first point. I think the second point is, under each of these elements, under the E of environment, under social, and under governance, we need guidance from our national policies to understand what is to be measured. And the third kind of framework would be what is relevant within that measurement. In other words, what is my specific risks? So I'm in full agreement that we need good guidance in terms of our total reporting framework. Private sector has moved along. We see many of the European-based clients, importers, opting for SBTI, but we also see that some local, as I said, versions from our stock exchange is being used as a middle-of-the-road approach. Is it internationally acceptable? I don't know. I think that'll also evolve over time. But my thinking would be that make sure that your country-specific MRV, make sure that the definitions of my specific elements within ESG and my underlying measurement points or data points, that we get consensus on that. I think that'll be a good starting point. And that, again, comes back to our regulatory side. Within that, each individual player can then make his selection based on his risks of what he should report. But I agree, without that guidance, it's a bit of a fragmented approach, definitely.
Thank you very much, Frans, for just responding to all the questions that we have just asked today. There are a bit more questions, but due to time, we cannot take them all. But we'll try to respond to them and just probably put them on our website. Thank you all for joining us for this first webinar in the Foundations for Change series. We hope today's discussion has provided valuable insights into the drivers shaping change in agriculture systems and the growing importance of sustainable low-emission agriculture globally. Special thanks to our speaker who has done an excellent job. Frans, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives and just your expertise with us. And to all participants, thank you for your active engagement and for the thoughtful questions that you asked. We'll look forward to welcoming you to the next series or next session in the series, where we will explore practical tools for measuring and managing agricultural greenhouse gases. There was a question that was asked on the measurement tools that we can use for methane and other gases. I think that is going to be addressed in our next session. Thank you again, everyone. We wish you a good day, a good afternoon, or a good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Please make a date with us. Look at, check our website. We'll remain in touch for the next webinar session in the series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.